The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Merry meet and merry part, bright the cheeks and warm the heart. For tread the circle thrice about, to keep unwelcome spirits out. Bide within the law you must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Mind the threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Merry meet everybody and welcome. My guest tonight is Don Webb, and we're going to be talking about his new book, How to Become a Modern Magus. Now, Don joined the Temple of Set in 1989, where he served as high priest for 6 years and is recognized as an Ipsidimus. He's the author of several books on left-hand path practices and philosophy, including Energy Magic of the Vampire. Questions and comments from the chat room are welcome. And if you'd like to join us here in chat and you're listening live, you can pop over to paraxradionetwork.com. All right, Don, welcome back.
Well, I'm so glad to be back. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. You know, your books make me think and I learn, and that's a good thing. So I may invite you for the next one too. But I got a couple of questions before we jump into the book, because the subhead of the book is How to Become a Modern Magus. What's the difference between a modern Magus and a not-so-modern one?
There's very few books written on the general idea of initiation, the how do I get started from the very beginning, and some of those books have quite a bit of age on them. Crowley, of course, wrote one. There's some from the 19th century, and we have different ways of thinking now. We've learned a lot of things in neurobiology and cultural studies, and there's a lot more things that the Magus can put to use.
Okay, that makes good sense. You know, your preface is called a very personal preference. And, you know, it could be, like I told you a minute ago, that whole preface would be a whole show in itself. I mean, I found it really interesting and insightful. And, you know, most people aren't comfortable being that candid to strangers, you know, in a book. So this was kind of a really pleasant surprise. What made you want to just get all that backstory out?
Well, this is, I think, actually connected with the title, the idea of the modern Magus. There was a time long before the internet, that when you would achieve some degree of skill in the occult world, the first thing you did is you would move to another town, change your name, come up with some outlandish story about how you had gained your powers, and just start afresh. That isn't working out. You know, we live in a world where you can find out anything about anybody. Even if they're trying to hide it, you can find it out in about 15 clicks. So I want to start off with that very idea that for people to learn and practice magic and to take the risks involved in the dangers of magic, I wanted to say, look, I'm a real guy in Texas, and this is how I found my way here, and this may be some of the things you will see on your unique path.
You said a lot, and again, very interesting, ups and downs, and, you know, things to smile at and things to feel, you know, a little sad about, and yeah, I just really enjoyed it. Just wanted to let you know. Now, before we get started, also, there's just so much info in the book, and I think I mentioned this to you also, that we're barely going to scratch the surface. So if it seems like I'm jumping around, you know, just fasten your seatbelt. And I think we'll get through. But, you know, okay, here's something else. I've always defined the word Magus as magician. But I looked it up to double check just to make sure, and it said that it's also a derogatory term for a conjurer or sorcerer who's a charlatan or trickster. And that kind of reminds me about the term warlock, too, which has both a positive and negative connotation. Any comment about that?
Well, we live in a rationalist society. And the thing that we do, those of us that are interested in the paranormal, me, you, your wonderful listeners tonight, that puts us aside from mainstream society. Mainstream society has totally adopted a rationalist, hopefully scientific, but mainly usually scientism as the way of thinking about things. And so any of these words certainly have a double edge. Now, the word magus itself is a Latin word. Originally, it comes from an old Persian word, magus, which means ritual specialist. Now, the ritual specialist is someone that's different than the priest. You go to see the priest or the priestess, you say, can you intervene with the gods on my behalf? And probably an offering is given. The ritual specialist is you go to him or her and you say, hey, I need to make this change in my life, dealing with parts of myself, with gods, with demons, with ancestors. What do I need to do? And the ritual specialist will then explain what you need to do. The ritual specialist is always about putting power in the hands of the seeker, as opposed to empowering him or herself by the reputation of the institution they're connected with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, of course it does. But, we're one more definition, and then I promise we're jumping into the book. But we've got one more term to clear up for those who might not be familiar with the term, and that's ipsissimus, and you are that. So you want to explain what that means?
Certainly. The term itself was a Latin coinage. It was coined by Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas said that the one thing that God has that we mortals don't have and can't have is being an ipsissimus, being his very own self. Well, toward the end of the 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche said, no, that is actually the aim of every human being. Every human being wants to eventually be able to say, I am my very own self. Nietzsche said his biggest boast was, ego sum ipsissimus in ipsissimo. I am my very own self in a world of my creation. Now, Nietzsche was a very popular writer for the founders of the Golden Dawn, a Victorian magical society. And so they chose that as the terminal title. That would be the title you would take at the end of your initiatory path. And so it's kind of hung around in Western magic. And, the Temple of Set is among the people that use that title.
Yeah, I had never heard of it. And being one of our own selves is possibly difficult in a world where you're trying to make everybody else happy. Well, most people are. So getting to that level is kind of wonderful.
Well, we do live very much in an authentic world. And to say I'm going to be authentic is not just kind of an idea, I'm going to try that. It means you're going to have to do a lot of self-searching. And some of the things you may find in your own inventory may not be the stuff you really like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Let me jump into the book, get down to business, because we can talk about this for a long time. The book is a manual for magicians of all schools to build and sustain a magical practice, and it's based on Egyptian magic, chaos magic, shamanism, and the secret techniques of the Temple of Set. So it's kind of like taking the best of all those worlds rolled up into one, isn't it?
Well, it was my hope. I mean, I wrote the book. During the year, we all stayed inside the whole year, which you probably remember. Yeah. And I had the question of if I could write a book for my 20-year-old self, what would I write? And that was the original idea. But then I thought about the fact that every magician I know wants to learn new techniques. I mean, if you're a good cook, you look for new recipes. Mm-hmm. If you're a painter, you see new ways to paint. So I put together what I thought was a synthesis of the path that I went through, that I have taught others, and or that I know people have gone through, because I've been doing magical practice for about 40 years and have met a lot of different magicians in a lot of different schools.
Mm-hmm. You think there has to be some kind of a similarity between every path, but they all kind of think differently, but there is a bond, I think, that sticks to everybody, don't you think?
Well, the art of magic, which is not just, hey, I'm going to wish for something really hard, does have techniques that you'll find in a lot of different places, whether it's accessing trance states, things to do with your voice, training the senses. Now, in a lot of occult schools, they think they have the only way. Not because perhaps they're egotistic, but because they didn't see any other sort of practice. Now we live in a world where we've had anthropology working really hard for about 200 years, and we have the social sciences, and we have psychology and neurobiology, and we can begin to look around and see, how are these things the same? What kind of brain waves does this tantric person do when they sit on a bed of nails, composed to a Western magician making a magic square? And then we can begin to see there's aspects of the body, of the mind, of the emotions, and of the will that can be accessed and taught. And then I say, all right, here's what we have. Here's what's known to work. Try some things. And then I have a lot of questions about your own experience. I hope with this book that people don't do this and say, I'm going to clone myself. I'm going to be another Don Webb, because we don't need another Don Webb. What I hope is that people discover unique things experientially. They experience it, they think about it, they decide, do I want this in my life?
Mm-hmm. Well, you said in the book, too, that this is a book that came to fruition because you wanted to write a book that works. And this definitely is one of those. And I'm not trying to be snarky, but I think there are a lot of books out there written by novices who don't have the background and experience to do so. And there's a lot of misinformation floating around all over the place. So, it will work. I mean, just from what I was reading, I mean, it draws you in, and there's so many different facets to it. I mean, and in your introduction to magic, you say that in order to practice, we must unlearn 6 popular lies about magic. So this is a good place to start. I don't think we've got time to go through each one, but as I was looking through them, the 6th one caught my eye, and that is magic does not equal sorcery. And that leads to the question, what's the difference between magic and sorcery?
And I have nothing against sorcery, by the way. I think every good magician should also be a good sorcerer. Mm-hmm. Sorcery is not interested in the why. Sorcery is a cookbook approach to having magical effects. If you say this chant and use these herbs and you do it at this time, you'll get this effect. Magic is about changing yourself so that you yourself become more of a ruling power in the universe. You become more ordered, more focused, more coherent. Magic is a self-change path, whereas sorcery is about getting really, really cool techniques.
Okay, yeah. I'm not going to have you run down all the 6 popular lies, but give me a few.
Well, there's a cult industry, and the cult industry says we have to produce a certain number of books. I understand that because I like getting paid for my books too. So one of the things that's largely put out in the occult industry is that magic is easy. This is really easy. Everyone can do it. A child can do it. Well, some aspects of magic everyone can do. That's true. Some aspects of playing basketball everyone can do, but you're probably not going to be in the NBA. Magic requires a lot of work. Another common misconception is that magic can't be taught. A lot of people who develop some magical skill think, this is just unique to me. I wouldn't even know how to pass it on. Or perhaps I can't pass it on. Now, fortunately for me, I have been a writing instructor for decades and decades and decades. For over 20 years, I have taught at UCLA Extension. Currently, I do a class called How to Write the Horror Novel. Writing is something that can be taught, but you have to be able to take the process apart, figure out the parts, and then have other people reassemble it. Magic as well. You can teach magic. And the general teaching, before you reach a place where you need an individual teacher, can be done and written and passed on in a lot of mediums.
It's like going to school and studying anything. I mean, you don't have to have some kind of innate talent. I mean, people can learn just by learning if they're open enough to learn.
Well, they learn, and they can also see this is what that's going to look like if I learn it. Now, almost everybody that takes up magical practice, they have some things they're very good at. If they didn't, they wouldn't have started magic in the first place. Mm-hmm. But that person who, say, is very good at accessing wisdom from her dreams may not be that good at causing an event to happen by speaking certain words. Mm-hmm. And there's a psychological aspect. The magician has to be able to control his or her universe just enough. Obviously, you're not becoming a god. You won't have total control of your universe at all. But you have to learn, when do I hold on tightly? When do I let things go? You have to learn the individual dance you came to this world to learn.
And you just mentioned the word God, and at the same time a question from the chat room came up for me. And it says, can humans become a literal God through the Magus journey?
Well, of course, that depends on what you mean by God. If you're thinking about the all-powerful God of Judeo-Christianity, no, of course not. If you're thinking about an entity who can cause things to happen by will alone, yes, you can. You can affect things through non-causal ways. It begins with minor miracles, right? I mean, most people that take up practical magic do it for two reasons, to get paid or to get laid. But you can then say, wait a minute, if I can cause this person to be attracted to me, or if I can cause myself to be luckier in the casino, what can I cause and what should I be causing? And that brings in both self-ethics and a question of looking at the universe and saying, wow, the universe is much more different, is much more miraculous and mysterious than I initially thought.
And now I'm just looking at some notes that I had, and one of the things that I was just going to bring up when we're talking about being God, or turning into gods, you have a section about dangers of occultism, and there's a whole list of dangers. And the one that jumped out first to me, and I guess it's my favorite of them all, was megalomania. And some people get the notion and that they are the one and the only and nobody's better. I mean, nobody, yeah. So, also, Aunt Edna. I want you to talk about that. That's the danger of occultism. So my two favorite, like I said, megalomania and Aunt Edna. But Aunt Edna needs, I think, more of explanation than megalomania.
I'll tell a story about Aunt Edna. One day, I happened to be in Denver. I love this city. Love to visit Denver. I was in an occult bookstore, and I heard a young couple behind me. By young, I mean people in their 30s, right? So not really, probably some people would say that. And they were having an argument about which book to buy. They had enough money to purchase one book, and they were discussing the either getting a book on rune magic or getting a book, I think, on dream control. I think those were the two. And I loved listening to their what they talked about, all this. And then the one of the couple said, "Hey, if we buy this, don't say anything at dinner because Aunt Edna is going to be there." And her husband, boyfriend, and significant other laughed and said, "Yeah, we won't mention this." All right, immediately I assumed that Aunt Edna was going to be some religious type who was very offended by magical practice. Well, it so happened that my particular lesson from the universe that day, I wound up in the same Chinese restaurant that this young couple were in, and also her mother, and then Aunt Edna shows up. And Aunt Edna walked in, and I could see easily about 12 foot away more occult jewelry than I think I'd ever seen. I thought, wow, she has the power to do everything except walk through a metal detector. She came and she sat down and she started talking about various things she had done, and and these certain groups that were like out to get her. The Scientologists were out to get Aunt Edna. Apparently, it was an actual let's get Aunt Edna department in the Scientologists. And she mentioned being in the Rosicrucians, and says I'm a 9th level Rosicrucian. That's the Illuminati, dear. I heard this over there, and I thought they didn't want to mention this book because Aunt Edna would pick it up, claim to be an expert, buy the book, and add it to this huge stew she has in her subjective universe already. So they kept talking about things that were very much not connected to the occult world. And Aunt Edna was quite entertaining since I didn't have to go home with her.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds about right. But let's talk a little bit, because we're going to have to take a break in about 5 or 6 minutes. But let's talk about some of the dangers of occultism, because I know people get into things and, they're bulletproof. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing's bad. It happens to other people because other people are dumb, that kind of thing. So let's talk about the dangers.
Well, there's a couple of dangers right off I want to talk about. Number one is I want to talk about the danger of poverty. Because when you approach the occult sciences, you will discover early on that there are people and practitioners that own much nicer stuff than you. And that's not what makes them more magical. I have a friend who makes the most beautiful occult jewelry in the world. But, it's pricey. It's pricey because she has to make it out of the correct gemstones and sometimes under certain conditions. And you don't want to start saying, well, I could get my invocation done if I could just buy this jewelry, or if I could just buy that book, or if I could buy this for my altar. And you have to watch that, because what you're actually doing is you're changing a mid-imagination, which is a very important commodity, into something that's much less interesting, which is money. Another danger of occultism is obsession. If you begin your practice and you are not a well-grounded human being, the first time you start having success, you'll want to spend all your time doing it. Now, I have a friend who writes wonderful books about the occult under the name Frater UD. He's a German magician, Rolf Tegmeyer, and he and I were talking about this. And we mentioned that the best students you always have are not people that have all the time in the world on their hands. It's that single mom that's raising her family, or the businessman with the big job who has to prioritize their time and resources and don't just get sucked into one particular point of view. Another danger of occultism, there are groups that think because of your background in some way, you are better suited for the occult because of your ethnic background, or because of your gender, or because of anything else that's completely random. Because of those things, there may be things that will work better for you. If you're a rune magician, it will probably have better luck with it if you speak a Germanic language, and a lot more if you speak a couple of them. If you are learning one of the things that's done in Japanese occultism, wow, it's really going to help if you speak Japanese and have some understanding. But you don't get an ethnic bonus for anything. There is no reason for any of your human prejudices to be bolstered by occult nonsense.
And a lot of people, like the goth movement, when that happened several years ago, teenagers are walking around and pretending to be somebody that they're not, because it was cool. And sometimes if you talk to somebody that says, oh, witches are so cool, I want to be one. And I guess it goes the same thing for occultism. Some people think that it's something to show off rather than something to live with and to do, right?
Well, you can always spot, because I go to some conferences of occultists, not just from the temple set. You can always spot the higher level practitioners because there's nothing about them that stands out unless they want it to.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't sit around boasting about their powers. They're very quiet, and you actually have to sort of tune in to their essence and say, "Oh, you're refined over there. You're like sitting next to a fire," but nothing outside screams this. But there's always these mid-level practitioners who have really funky clothes and jewelry and will use phrases that sound very impressive. I try in my own writing to never use a phrase that's not in common English if there's a word for it in common English. There's going to be some words, particularly since I do so much Egyptian soulcraft,
mm-hmm.
I have to use the Egyptian word. But I think that if you have to mystify, if you have to lay down a line of bullshit so people understand what you're doing, that's a sign you're not doing stuff well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Got another quick question from the chat room. Do some beliefs block advancement in the journey?
Belief for a magician is a tool. It's like a screwdriver. And if you can't let beliefs go or change them, then in fact, beliefs can really stop your practice. Beliefs that are connected to your ethics are probably good if you do some self-examination. But belief is entirely a tool of the magician. Let's say a magician wants to cause a storm. Always one of the fun things to play with, weather magic. You have to believe during the time you're doing the ritual that whatever you're doing, the smoke you're sending into the air, or perhaps a cauldron you're stirring, is the universe. Now, do you want to believe that when you finish? No, of course not. But you have to have belief at the right time. So having strong beliefs is important. Being attached to strong beliefs, usually not a good idea for the magician.
And it's not generally good that people will put blinders on either, right?
Because as humans we do that.
Sure.
We're good primates, and we want to fit in with the other primates in our band. And if we don't realize we're putting the blinders on for a while and think they're reality, that's never good. That's not good in magic or in politics or in art or in any field of human endeavor.
Yeah, definitely, sure. All right, we're going to be talking about the prelude to the 12 chapters when we come back from the break. And we've got a whole lot of other stuff to talk about as well. So I think everybody, you need to hunker down, and we'll be back in 2 minutes.
Cauldron will be right back, so don't go away. If you end up with webbed feet, remember, you've been warned.
As you go about your daily life, look closer. Every year across America, a staggering 4.2 million youth are homeless or trafficked. Covenant House is the national leader providing safe housing for youth, 50 years strong. Every youth who walks into Covenant House gets clean clothes, hot meals, medical care, and a safe place to sleep. So, look closer at Covenant House and help us fight youth homelessness. To help or get help, go to covenanthouse.org.
Are you haunted by shadow people in the middle of the night?
Do you secretly love all things creepy and spooky, enjoying ghost stories and horror fiction from the best storytellers?
Do you have a true ghost experience you want to share, but no one will believe you?
If yes, listen to the professionals on What Are You Afraid of? Horror Paranormal Show Friday nights at 9 p.m. on Para X Radio and at www.whatayouafraidofpodcast.com.
What are you afraid of on Para X?
Our creepy and demented hosts are on call to provide you with all your spooky needs with true ghost stories, interviews, indie music, and new horror fiction. We are ready to scare you.
Para X. Missed an episode of Stirring the Cauldron? Then be sure to check out marlabrooks.com and check out the archive. And while you're there, check out Marla's weekly Witches Oracle card reading. Explore the site to find many great resources, such as information on tarot, oracle readings, metaphysical consultations, and links to all of Marla's books. That's marlabrooks.com. Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And my guest tonight is Don Webb, and we're talking about his new book, How to Become a Modern Magus. And we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it now. Don, you suggest that people read the book thoroughly before they begin the year of living magically. I mean, it's set up as a year-long training manual, and those who follow it will get out of the training what they put into it. So, and that was very well said, because nobody can complain that they didn't learn much as they thought they would, because it's up to the individual to get the information that's there for the taking, right?
Mm-hmm. Anything that you're going to do that's a manual as opposed to a book about something, you have to really understand what do the exercises mean. I mean, you know, I have a gym membership, but it only matters those weeks I get down there and work out. You know, those weeks that I just kind of drive past the gym, I don't see my middle getting any smaller.
And yeah, so it's broken down to months, 1 month for each thing. But I want to hear, because about in the beginning, I want to hear about the Inshallo Rite, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not, because it's to create a magical helper as the first step on the road to becoming a magician. So let's talk about that, please.
Well, Inshallo is a creation that what most people would nowadays call results magic, but about 25 years ago, people called chaos magic. It's simple, practical magic. And the reason I have people create a little magical servitor is before they start this, hey, let's see if they have a talent to make something work. Then, if it works, I start beginning to ask some questions about why did you think it works? How do you know it worked? Inshallo has a few very simple things that he does. He will help you find books and tools that you need. He will help you interact with the people you need to interact with. And he will generally kind of give you a nudge if you're not paying good attention to your practice. These are all good things to have in a servitor. And once you've seen some results with that, you can then begin to have the whole problem of magical knowledge. Now, let me tell you what I mean by the problem of magical knowledge. Mm-hmm. I had a friend of mine, well, he still is a friend of mine, that was going to India to start some very serious study with some left-hand path magicians there. And I wanted to get him a really nice going-away gift. So I performed, standing out in front of half-price books, a simple, hey, I'm going to go in there and find something that's perfect. Well, I went in and I found what is I later discovered to be the most expensive and best English Sanskrit grammar. And it was on sale. It was usually the college textbook, and as a textbook, usually goes for like $150. And there it was, $15. I bought it. I gave it to him. Now, did my magic make that happen? Well, of course not. It's a bookstore. You're going to find books. Well, of course it did. What's the chances of a bookstore in Dallas, Texas, having a specialized book for Sanskrit linguistics? But the real problem of magical knowledge is the magician then must make the decision in his or her mind, yes, I made that happen, or yes, magic made that happen. And there has to be a moment of wonder. Now, I've been a magician long enough. I know that if I try to arrange a miracle occurs. But the difference between ordering an event and a true magical moment is there's no way I could have foreseen the way that played out. It was for me a moment of just pure ecstasy. I walked in, I saw this large book. It was on the floor, what it was supposed to be. I picked it up, a concise introduction to Sanskrit grammar. Oh, this looks exactly like what he needs. And I went, bought it, gave it to him at my party that night, and it wasn't until I heard his reaction on receiving the book that I discovered what a sought-for book it was. Magic, if it does nothing else, should bring you a sense of wonder. And a sense of wonder is the rarest thing in our universe.
Yeah, you're right. It truly is. When I heard the name Inshallo first, I thought the Arabic, Inshallah, which means if Allah wants it, or something. And I had to look it up. I just said, no, maybe it's not spelled the right way, but yeah, I mean your writing style is very refreshing. I mean, you don't mince words, but you can be blunt and yet encouraging. Like at the end of the Rite, where you do ask the 15 questions about experience, then you said, and I'm going to quote this, if you did not do the Rite and get results, those questions are just spinning shadows. If you did the Rite, you're ready for the rest of the book. Congratulations. That took some bravery and some discipline. So, this is kind of like, you're not this very pedantic teacher that, smacking things into your head and you have to do it this way and whatever. I mean, you're really good about this. Good, bad, and encouraging. That's important.
Well, it's very important for people if they're dealing with something that has a largely subjective nature, such as magic, to be able to say, here are some of the feelings that you're going to have, and here are some of the things you're not going to get answered. Because I've seen other books on initiation. There's a pretty good book by Franz Barden called Introduction to Hermetics. A wonderful book. It's translated really badly into English, so if you read it in German, you're much better off. But he is so slow that looking through the book, I thought, to actually do all of the work at the pace he recommends, it would take 15 years. Who is going to actually do that? Whereas I thought, I'll get something that someone can actually do in an evening, and we'll get that kind of result, which is bothersome, as in something happened, but I don't know if I can quantify it.
Somebody just said, what if they're picking up the book for the first time? They're not, not totally novices, but, never have done and created a rite, doing a rite or created any kind of somebody to help them, a magical thing. Is it okay for everybody to do it? Can they all do it without, being more educated, to say the least, in what they're talking?
Absolutely, because the element of the design is there, knowing that people are going to have vast differences of background. We don't live in a society where the occult sciences are forbidden and hard to know. Every person picking up this book, I would be astounded if it's the first book they ever read about magic. Might be. It could happen. Mm-hmm. Or it's the first time some of these ideas have occurred to them. What I am suggesting is we can have these ideas put down in a systematic manner so you can begin to develop and cultivate a practice. It's not just a matter of you heard this on this one podcast and you read this one book over here. It's like this would be a systematic initiatory journey. Whatever you've learned before, great. That's skills you already have. And what you need to learn is what you need to learn. But the idea of it being systematic probably is fairly unique to this book.
And also, if people are going to go through the book the first time, they might not understand all of it. And that might be, to some people, well, I'm stupid. I can't do this because I didn't understand the whole thing. But that's not the case, right? I mean, you get a feeling of the book when you read it, but then the questions will be answered when you start to do the activities and stuff, right?
Well, that's also why I have you start out by making the servitor Inshallo, because if you're having real trouble, Inshallo will help you find a book you need. In addition to the fact there's a huge list of other resources in the book. But one shouldn't avoid any type of magical discipline just thinking, hey, this stuff is too hard. Parts of it may be difficult to figure out. And some things will be difficult to figure out not because of intellectual reasons, but because of emotional reasons. Because the power of magic is in your emotion and your imagination. The focus of magic is usually in your intellect. And most of us don't have all these parts of our lives working well. Some things are going to be harder for some people. Some things will be easier for some people.
Yeah, well, and you have to be open enough to take the step and do something that you've not done before. And what would you tell somebody if they were afraid to create a servitor, for example? Because you hear about certain things like, oh, this tulpa, we created that and it turned on it and it killed the person that created it.
No, I mean, that's a lovely story. We love those stories because they're just entertaining as hell. Mm-hmm. First off, you're probably not going to have enough energy to do this. But the real thing is, you'll notice in my creation of Inshallo, I said, hey, if you do this and you've worked with this a while and you don't want to do it anymore, here's the kill switch. Mm-hmm. Do these steps, it goes away. And that also is to give people an idea of how to set up magical work. We all have learned the story. Either we read it originally in Lucian in Latin, but more likely we learned it watching it with Mickey Mouse, of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Mm-hmm. And the Sorcerer's Apprentice is a story, it was set in Egypt, because of course the Romans, Egypt was the place to go for magic. And this Sorcerer's Apprentice notices the sorcerer can take a broomstick and make it carry water for him. Well, carrying water from a well, if you've ever had to do this, is back-breaking work. So he sets up, he has the broomstick going and filling up water for his bath. And then he discovers he doesn't know how to stop it. He doesn't know the counter spell. He just keeps his characters coming in and putting more and more water in the bath. And then in Lucian, in the book The Golden Ass, he grabs a axe and he starts chopping it. And that actually makes several smaller servitors who are then carrying water, making it a much worse process. Mickey Mouse has the same process in Fantasia. So for those of you that aren't those good Latin scholars, go for getting a copy of Fantasia. But I have people start with this to give an idea of, to design something, I have to think, what's going to happen if it works? Because most people, when they begin practical magic, they're just so damn excited something works. They don't have the follow-up question of, and now what? Well, as we learned, if you ever had to learn drive a vehicle in the military, the first thing you learn in every vehicle is, how do I make it stop? Mm-hmm. And so I set all that up as a example that people can have. They can have this with, and so Inshallo does things like find books. You may want to tell, hey, don't be finding so many books for me. Look, I only have so much money. Thank you for pointing out there's all these things. Or maybe you use Inshallo to remind you of things like the library system, or even a good garage sale to go to.
And once you create the Inshallo, it can be with you forever, right?
If you want, a lifetime interaction with this kind of creature, I have created a few servitors that I've used for years. I created a servitor about 35 years ago to help me find lost luggage. You can probably figure out what's going on in my life that particular day. And I still call him up to find lost items. He does a really good job. I have lent him to some of my friends. Say, this is how you call him up. The magicians are always great. My non-magician friends will try it out. Don't like the results sometimes, but say, yeah, I did find the stuff.
It's interesting. And if you didn't want to keep them, no hard feelings, how would you dismiss them? I don't know a better word.
Dismissing is fine. I would simply draw them back and either reabsorb the energy into myself. It's kind of like taking apart something I'd built, or I would offer it to some entity, some celestial entity as a gift. Hey, made this for you. I don't need it anymore. You can go work for you. The same with anything that you get that you don't want to keep forever. We all get a lot of things in our lives, and for the technological kind of 21st century thinker, you probably look upon this as an app. This is an app that's running on my phone. Okay. Is that where you want to be spending your energy? Is that the best way to do it?
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, there are 12 full months of activities, rituals, spells, and exercises. And at the end of every chapter, there, again, is a list of questions to be answered. There's also, I'm just giving everybody knowing what's in the book, there are also magical powers of elements, gods, and esoteric traditions. There are weekly and daily exercises, as well as emotional and mental training connected to each month's topic. All bases are covered, aren't they?
I tried to fulfill everything that I think someone needs to know. Now, for example, the mental training. At the end of every month, I say, well, start with the basic stuff. Did you not understand any words? Go and look them up and write down the definition in your magical diary. Here's some interesting figures you may want to learn about. Now, people may or may not choose to do that. If they do, that gives more material for the mind to work on and more material for your dreams to work on and so forth.
Let's talk about the 12 months, because each one, again, has a separate meaning. In your words, each chapter offers a mask. So let's talk about the masks.
Well, one of the things that magicians do now, and have always done, and we know archaeologically, human beings have been doing this for at least 20,000 years, and maybe for a lot longer. The shaman is often uses the mask. You put the mask on, you become a different entity. You look like a different entity to other people. You take the mask off, you hang it on the wall of your hut, you can talk with it, or you can ignore it. So I give 12 little sub-personas people can play with. Some of the masks teach like basic things, like the first mask teaches you about beginnings and endings and barriers and crossroads. That magic has moments it starts and stops. And you have just started this process in yourself. And so you can begin to also have that feeling of, I know I just started something magical. Then I began with the 4 elements of Western magic: fire, earth, air, and water, and talk about what these things symbolize so you can begin to see and feel these things in yourself. We all know some of these things. We all know fire. Every person listening to this tonight has had the fire of anger and the fire of sexual attraction at some point. Hopefully not at the same time. And we know that fire makes us feel different. We also know the fire of I am warm and safe in my home. And that itself is a type of warmth we work with. So I start the psyche with, we're going to play with fire and its meanings. And you're going to do some manipulations of that force. And then from fire, which is desire, which is big power of magic, I ask the question, well, what do you desire? What are you after? And I go after earth. Earth can be a symbol of material wealth. Earth can be a beautiful field of daisies. It can be of the stones of a house you're building. It's all these things that we view as being somewhat more permanent than ourselves. So I step people through a series of psychological and magical explorations and then say, hey, here's some things that are connected with this idea from major traditions, some going back as far as Egypt, and some like chaos magic going back as far as the internet.
The fact about Janus and starting first of the year, and maybe people will think they had to start off in January.
I let people pick the years they want, because I say you should pick dates that are meaningful for you, because if there's some meaning in the date, it has more power for your psyche. Maybe it's your birthday. Maybe it was a day that your mother passed away and you realized, hey, I'm on my own in the world. Maybe it's the 4th of July, because that's really significant to you with all the ideas of American freedom. You have to pick the dates you like. Now, in most occult traditions, they would tell you what to pick. I say that the map to your own psyche is in your head, not in my head.
The other thing, too, was somebody was asking, does it take 30 days to go through each chapter? I mean, does it take a full year you want them to hold on for 30 days for each chapter, or can they go a little faster or slower, or what?
Well, of course, it's their book, right? And you know, they're not going to. I'm not going to come to their house and knock on the door and say you were too slow, you know, or you were too quick on the Freya chapter, because people will do what they want or need to do. The reason I chose that is so there's enough of the thing, enough discipline of I kept doing it. I didn't just do the parts that really felt good, but then it goes on to something else. So there's enough change that I think you'll be pretty interested for the whole year. But there's also that notion of discipline, and I need you spend some time on these things.
Okay, so it's free will. You know, do it the best way you can, right?
Well, yeah, because it's going to be. I mean, I may wind up because I am connected with some institutions that teach magic other than the Temple of Set. I may wind up doing classes on it. That would be much more structured. But the real thing is, this should be done in the way that works for you. In fact, as I point out in the book, I talked to many, many people about their initiatory methods over the years. And most people, you know, they start something, then a big life event happens, and they can't keep it up for a while. I totally have that set up for that. You can set this stuff aside. There are even some exercises that you should do if certain large life events happen. Like if you have the loss of a loved one, that's going to be a much bigger thing that month than whatever might be going on in my classes. So I have a section in the back called the Book of Dates and say, hey, if any of these things happen to you, here's something you can do instead. Some of them be great, like getting a new job or finding a new lover. And some can be awful, like losing a job or losing a lover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we have to wind down because it just went by too quickly. But can you give out your website and let people know where they can find you and more interesting? You've got a lot of books too, by the way. So,
I don't currently have a website that I'm using, so go to Amazon. You can see, of course, my other occult books as well as my fiction. And, I hang out on Facebook a lot. And so if you look for the Don Webb, who has thousands of pictures of cats, that's me.
That's easy. That's great. All right. Well, thank you for coming in, writing a book that really captivated me for a long time, and it will when I get down to the nitty-gritty of it. And, let us know when you write another book, and we'll have you back on.
I absolutely will do that. And, of course, I'll offer you something I wouldn't offer most people. You know my email. If you run into special problems, send me a note. I'm way more than glad to help you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Well, speaking of thanks, we need to thank everybody for listening in as well tonight. And until next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more fun. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without permission is strictly prohibited.
You have been listening to the Para X Radio Network.